Humdrummety, humdrummety, humdrummety.
Hey there, and welcome back. Did you ever think the desire to live a more empowered life could lead to being more assertive in the boardroom as well as the bedroom? My guest today is founder of the STIR Institute, where he blends his certification in transactional analysis with his training as a professional BDSM Dom. Yes, you heard that right. To help individuals stop living the life they think they should and start living the life they want. Tune in to find out how switching it up on the dance floor can make you a better boss. All right, let's get to it and whip this show into shape. Hey, Matthew. Thanks for joining me today on Humdrummety. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. Great to see you again. Thank you.
Yeah, we did do a pre-interview before this just to get to know each other. So, Matthew, it's interesting. When I started to prepare for this interview, I actually found myself sort of having a tough time how I was going to approach it because, as listeners heard in the intro, you're a transformational coach and the founder of the STIR Institute, but you're also a BDSM Dom. So I wasn't sure how, because these things so intertwine to each other, I wasn't sure how I would start untying this knot to cover all these topics, because I'm sure the listeners, their ears are going to pick up about this whole Dom thing. But I don't think that's really, there's so much more to you than that. And I really want to get into uncovering, who the real Matthew Riven is as a person, as a professional, and as a human being. So
I will say, I do appreciate your saying you were trying to figure out how to untie the knot. I really appreciate the double entendre there.
Yeah, that wasn't intentional. I guess that was just the old Freudian slip knot. Now, let's go back and talk about the STIR Institute that you started.
Okay.
And one of the things that's on the website, it says that STIR promotes stepping confidently into the life you want rather than the life you've been repeating. So how did STIR Institute start? And perhaps we should talk, begin with, what does STIR, S-T-I-R, stand for? I believe that's an acronym.
It's an acronym. It stands for Sex and Sexuality, Trauma, Intimacy, and Relationships, STIR. And where that started was after many, many years of working with transactional analysis and with my trainer, my therapist, and then getting trained in TA myself, certified in transactional analysis. I recognized that in all those years, one thing that never came up in more than a decade of individual and group work, nobody ever talked about sex or sexuality, not once. In many years of seeing other patients, other clients of group work and individual work, nobody talked about it once. And that to me was absolutely astounding. And then when I was working with this dominatrix in her course, I realized that she was doing some of these same exact practices and therapy methodologies that I had used, experienced, trained, and taught with others. And it was the same exact thing. And so what I recognized was the fact that many psychologists, many therapists are really, really good with trauma or family of origin issues, but they don't really understand sex, sexuality, the power we all have with our eros energy. And that was kind of a miss. At the same token, I recognize that there's a lot of sex therapists out there, relationship therapists out there, who are great with the sexuality and the relationship standpoint, but they may not work so well with family of origin and our youth traumas and other things that create who we are. And I'm sitting right in the middle with phenomenal trainings from both sides. And working with my former therapist, who's now a mentor and coach for me, started the STIR Institute to help people recognize these benefits and some of the power they have. And it's not about being overtly sexual in your entire life, but this is energy that we have and how to use it and how to use that power to be better at our relationships, whether that's with a significant other or that's with our kids or it's with our parents. It's how to control yourself and your energies to help you start living the life that you want and taking control of your own life.
So as we've kind of established then that so many of these aspects are intertwined together, right?
Very much.
In this knot. And you know, you seem to be, you know, taking an approach that is multifaceted, right? You're not just doing, you know, one side of, you know, your coaching with that is, you know, either sexuality based. You're also looking at, you know, the power outside of sexuality. But, you know, how are these things so entwined, and how do we, you know, start untying this to get an understanding? You know, are we, you know, obviously some of this seems to be very kind of Freudian, and people use the term Freudian, I think, negatively a
Way too
lot.
much and too
Yeah,
negatively. Way
and
too
too
much. Yes.
negatively, but he sort of would say that many of these things come from our childhood, unresolved sexual, you know,
I've never seen it as unresolved sexual anythings from our childhood. I'm not a Freudian scholar. I'm not a Freudian worker. I don't have the background from that per se. Eric Berne, who was the founder of transactional analysis and that whole theory methodology starting back in the 1960s, I'm gonna get this wrong, but the paraphrase of his quote is that after self-preservation, sex is the most important part of our lives. It's a lot of, well, depending on how repressed we are growing up, and in North American culture, there's a lot of sexual repression that goes on, just in terms of we're not supposed to be sexual. We don't talk about it. We don't discuss it. It doesn't come up. It's not taught well in schools. But who we are, what our relationships are with sex. We're not, women, not supposed to be sexual. Men, supposed to be sexual up to a point. Nobody talks about it. Nobody brings it up. And it's a large facet of who we are.
so I come to you then, you know, for some coaching. You know, where do
Mhm.
we begin? Because it, you know, it sounds to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but do you always start with this idea, you know, as the basis in sexuality? And does it,
Far
you
from
know,
it.
is far from it? So it's not that
Far
just the
from it.
sexuality is manifesting to other aspects of our lives. If I come to you saying, like, I am not having, you know, I don't feel I have the power, I don't feel I'm on the trajectory with my career that I want, you know, Matthew, help me. You know, where do we start with that?
So where most people come to me, where the sexuality fits in, is most of my work is based on power and relationships and our relationships to power. And who better to understand power than somebody who's been trained in it with the Dom sub relationships or the Dom sub knowledge that I have. And that's where I come from. It's all about power and relationships. So I think it would help. Let's back up a little bit. I'm not sure how many of your listeners know what transactional analysis is. So let's start with TA. Transactional analysis started in the 60s with Eric Berne, and it's all about the everything that we have as a transaction. You and I are transacting right now. It's not just an interaction. There are gifts that we're giving each other. There's knowledge about each other that we're giving. With your parents, starting pretty much with your mom in utero, starting pre-verbal before you were 18 months old, you were getting messages from your parents in these transactions of what your worth was like. How do I get attention from my parents? How do I get positive strokes? How do I get love that I need? Because we all need that. And what we do to get from our parents love and respect and power is the way that we're going to interact with people for the rest of our lives unless we fix those things. Some people get through their childhood unscathed. It's rare, but your parents gave you positive messages and you can handle anything that comes your way. I'm not going to see those clients. On the other hand, people had parents where they had conditional love. If you were loud and boisterous, you got yelled at and pushed aside. So you learned very quickly, I have to be quiet and meek and a wallflower to get my needs met. I have to game my parents because they were 1 minute they were loving and doting on me, and the next minute they were completely and totally unreachable, and there was nothing I could do. So you learn as a child how to game that situation. Great. It works fantastic when you're 18 months or 3 years or 6 years old. Doesn't work when you're 36 years old and you start playing games with other adults who are not going to like the gamesmanship because they can see through it. And those are the patterns that we have growing up. And that's what we carry into adulthood. When somebody comes to me and says, these are the things that I'm working and I'm having trouble with, we start looking at What do you think about yourself? Where do you fit existentially? Do you think that you're not okay and everybody else is? Or do you think that you're the only one who's okay and everybody else is not worthy of you? And we start working on these, and that's the relationships that you have growing up and moving forward. Where does the sex and sexuality fit in on that? Your gamesmanship and how you believe you get power and love is going to affect all your relationships, whether that's with your parents or siblings, managers or subordinates, or significant others, and your sexual desires. Where does that all come into play? It all rolls in together. But I don't talk about sex all the time. Quite frankly, it may happen rarely with some clients. It may happen never with some other clients. It may happen a lot down the road with some clients as they're trying to figure out this facet of their life that they've never been able to talk to anybody about previously. But you ask what happens the first time you enter my room? First thing I'm going to ask is, what do you want to change about yourself? And that's going to happen every session from there on out. It's all about you and your desire to take power and control over your own life. What do you want to change about yourself? That's the first question I ask every session, every client.
So we come in, we have our initial meeting, we determine, this is what I'd like to change about myself. Now, does this come down to desires? Of course, we're not just talking about sexual desires, but desires to how we would like our life to be. Is that where we're
Absolutely.
starting from?
That's a lot of where we're starting from. I would like to be less anxious. I would like to be happier with my life. I'd like to have a better relationship with my spouse. All of those things. I keep bouncing from job to job. I can't seem to get ahead. I worked somewhere for 3 years and quit out of frustration, and I've done that 5 times. It's a pattern you need to break. These are things that you want to change, and we start from there.
And so we speak about power. Is really the start of this getting power over yourself? Is that step one?
That, in a lot of ways, that is step one. It's step two. Step one is figuring out what it is you want to change.
Right.
Step two is, what is it that we can use, that we can help you to make that change? Is it some part of the way you feel, the way you think, the way you behave? How do we go about helping you take control over your thoughts and feelings? So here's a great example. Taking control of ourselves. You ever hear somebody say, "Oh my goodness, that person makes me so angry"? Or have you ever thought to yourself, "Oh, they make me so mad. They make me so frustrated"? Nobody's making you anything. That's one of the first things that I confront a lot with clients is they say, "My spouse makes me so angry." No, no, no. You're choosing to get angry at your spouse. Nobody else can control our emotions. Only we can. Somebody will say to me, that just makes me anxious. No, you're choosing to be anxious in response to that situation. Thoughts and feelings don't randomly come into our brains. We control them.
So then we get the power to control ourselves, power over ourselves. And then are we then turning and pushing that power out into our environment, whether it be work, relationship, other aspects of our lives, that we are now trying to take power over a situation, over an environment?
So, well, let's go back to what I said a second ago. Nobody can make us feel anything. The other caveat, the other side of that coin is I can't make you feel anything either.
Well, if
I'd have
you're
a lot.
if you're a master of manipulation, and you know how to push buttons, you could do that.
You can push buttons, but it ends up being the person's choice in how they react. Yes, you can push buttons and manipulate people, and that's some of the stuff that some of my clients do. And in the long run, it just doesn't work well. It leads to resentment. It leads to narcissism. It leads to a lot of problematic relationships and ways that just don't work for you time and time again. But because you can't make me feel anything, I can't make you feel anything either. I can't make you angry at me. I can't make somebody fall in love with me. I can't make somebody leave if they don't want to leave. So when it comes to taking power, the only thing you can do in a situation with other people is take power over yourself and come from a point of leadership, come from a point of openness and vulnerability and say, this is what's going on.
Then through your therapy and you talk about, making breakthroughs in confidence, connection, and fulfillment, and getting this somewhat control over yourself, you just then are exuding that power, which influences how others then respond to you? Is that
Yeah,
the goal?
that is the goal. That is very much the goal. And you got a little furrowed brow going right now. So I'm not sure convinced or not, but that is really the goal, is understanding both where your power is and also what is the limit of your power. I can control myself. I can't control anybody else. I may or may not be able to control situations. I had a very frustrating this morning dealing with an airline and a flight accidentally getting canceled from my ticket. And oh my goodness, I'm leaving tomorrow on a flight and it no longer exists on the webpage. What's going on? There's a lot of frustration for me, and I didn't handle it all that well because of all the stress involved in the situation. Other times, something like that might come up, and I'd be like, all right, let me call and figure out what's going on here. Just handle it better than I did. So that was a lack of control over myself in a situation. I need to do better in the future and handle that better and be able to say, okay, yelling at the impersonal bot who's trying to understand the fact that I'm saying, no, don't text me, get me an agent, is not going to help this situation, especially when the agent picks up the phone and you're all riled up and angry. So you need to control yourself first.
And that goes back to this transactional analysis, because is then every instance in which we have the potential to react a certain way, is that the transaction? And we are approaching it on a sort of step-by-step basis, every individual transaction between us and some sort of power influencing on us.
The transactions are actually between people. The transactions are going to be, now in the case you're describing, so transactional analysis believes that we all have three ego states, not the Freudian ones, but we have a parent, an adult, and a child ego state. You inside you have your little Graham is still there. And the messages you got from your parents and any other important adult figures you had growing up are still in your head. And you have this adult that developed, starts about 7, 8 years old, gets a little more refined by our teens and is fully there late teens. This adult ego state inside of you that we should be interacting with the world mostly from adult. Adult doesn't carry a lot of emotion. There's some, not a lot. And it's very much, this is how I have to interact with the world. From an adult ego state, I could have sat there for the half an hour on hold with the airline and just thinking to myself, okay, I can't do anything until they answer the phone, so I can do laundry or get something else done, as opposed to sitting here and stewing. Instead, I had a very child reaction of, oh my God, what's going on? The flight's going to be missed, and all this panic and all this anger and all this frustration that came from my child ego state. Or I might have had messages from my parent talking to my child saying, you screwed up again. Parental messages to the child. So that's all the internal transactions going on. The transactions that Eric Berne, the transactional analysis, talks about is either internal to us or between two people. Right now, you and I are talking adult to adult. And every now and then, with the jokes and the conversations about untying the knot or anything else, there's a little bit of the humor that comes in between our two child ego states. That's the transactions we're having. Where things can go awry is maybe I'm talking to adult, but I'm actually coming from my child and sending you kind of nasty under the table messages to your parent, or my parent to your child, and I'm trying to talk down to you while I'm seemingly coming from adult. These are the transactions. That happens a lot between couples in a relationship. You think you're talking adult to adult, but you really end up talking one parent to one child, and then child to child, and messages are getting misconstrued, and anger starts up because all of a sudden you pushed somebody's buttons and they decide to get angry at their spouse. Sometimes we don't know, most of the time, we just don't know why. That just makes me so angry. Well, going to a therapist, coming to a coach, going to see a counselor, and figuring those transactions out and why you react that way when something happens, that's the key. Those are the transactions.
All right, I just want to shift gears here. Um, so on your site, you have this another section which is called Conscious Kink.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that and how both sides of your practice can coexist together in this idea of somebody who's coming to you for personal help, but also at the same time, they see oh, hey, Matthew also offers some sort of, sexual desire training here. How do those two things coincide together?
I will start by saying I'm not hands-on with clients. So that kind of work, it's all about a conversation side of things. I am not hands-on with clients at all. So talk about the conscious kink side first, the start of your question. So conscious kink is bringing up our desires and talking about them openly and honestly. And communication and consent are critical in the BDSM and kink worlds. It's where everything starts. You have to be able to talk about what your desires are and what your limits are, and you consent in on everything. Great conversation I had with somebody not too long ago was the fact that in the kink world, everything is a no until you get consent. In the rest of our lives, most everything is a yes until somebody says no. The boss comes at you and says, I need you to work tonight, versus can you work tonight? It's two different things. So conscious kink is talking about what's going on and what is your intention behind what you're doing. So let's just start with the 80-pound gorilla, the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Christian Grey is not healthy. Christian Grey is the Grey from 50 Shades of Grey. It is not a healthy presentation of kink and BDSM and people who are part of that lifestyle. He is not. He's unhealthy, and it's a Hollywood bastardization of the community. You see that often in lots of Hollywood portrayals. That's unconscious kink is how we would define it. Conscious kink is what is your intention? What do you want to get out of it? There's a negotiation that goes on before you play with a partner that may last an hour or more and may happen 2 or 3 days or more before you play with somebody, before you have the excitement of being sexual with somebody. And it's to make sure, what is your desire? What do you want to get out of it? What do you want to experience? And having those conversations with somebody first, does it take the spontaneity away? When you're playing with somebody new, yeah, it can. But over time, you learn what your partner wants, and these conversations become much freeing, much more open, and you'll find that the relationship you have, the sexual relationship that you have with your partners, improve. So I teach conscious kink to individuals and couples and groups. I teach kink to psychologists who have psychiatrists and psychologists and other coaches because they're going to have clients who come to them and they may not understand what's going on. I'm not making a psychologist a kink practitioner, but they need to be kink aware when their clients come to them and say, I'm having fantasies about this, or my partner wants to do that, and recognize what is healthy and what is not healthy, what is safe and what is not safe. When it comes to my practice with clients, everything is conversational.
Well, and now, whether you meant to do it or not, you've introduced part of this huge knot that I experienced when I was approaching this interview, because we have on one side, you have your practice of, how to empower people for themselves. You then
Right.
also on your site have this portion about conscious kink, but then you also promote that you yourself are a Dom. And so to me, like, are we getting some sort of conflict of interest? When people come and they're looking for therapy from Matthew Riven, do they kind of go just from the outset, knowing these things, not knowing you personally? Because I think from this conversation, we can get an understanding of, how grounded of a person you are, but they're kind of like, I got some warning signs coming up here because I'm not sure what this guy is going to attempt to do. Is he going to attempt to subvert me into this realm of BDSM and sort of, use his power on me to, bring me into that world. So it becomes, like I said, this whole knot of, do you find, like, where does this Matthew, the coach, and Matthew, the Dom, how do you cut those two aspects of your life?
I don't. In many, Matthew the Dom and Matthew the coach, if you know what I mean by a Venn diagram, there is a portion that overlaps, certainly, but there are distinct differences between the two. To start with, let's talk about the Dom aspect. So I'm actually a switch. I'm happy to sub. I'm happy to Dom. It depends on the partner, depends on the situation I'm in. But my understanding of power helps me understand when do I need to take a following role, when do I need to take a leadership role. Again, it's having the power and control over myself. When it comes to the unhealthy Dom, yes, there are lots of them out there. And yes, that is part of the problem and why you need to go to people and have a community. If you're interested in this world, you need to have a community of trained individuals and people you feel safe with. For my friends who know what I do, and not all of them do, for my friends who know what I do and know my background, when typically a woman asks me, hey, I've been talking to this gentleman online, or I've been meeting with this guy and he wants to do some Dom sub work, I would estimate that about 95% of the time I look at my friends and tell them to run. Just block the guy and run, because they're unhealthy. They're the Christian Greys, they're the misogynistic bleeped word here that are looking to get their own needs met and do so by subjugating or abusing women. They're misogynistic. They are unhealthy. They're the Doms you need to run from. They're the ones you read about in the paper. Somebody who's healthy, well, let me ask you this question. Between the Dom and the sub, between a healthy Dom and their sub, who has the power?
Well, by you asking that question, I have a feeling that the answer is going to be the unobvious, which would be the sub.
The sub has the power. And here's why. Because when you practice consciously and you are trained and you're in a healthy relationship where you're playing with power, it does not have to be a 24/7 lifestyle thing. This could be play, and there's a lot of psychological definitions of play, and one of them is it's time constrained. For the next little bit, we're going to play with these power dynamics, and there's reasons behind that we can get to too in a minute. But you negotiate and you say, what is the relationship you want during this play period between the one with the power and the one without? And the sub is the one who says, these are my boundaries. These are my hard no's. This is what I want to experience. And those are the limits. And a Dom will abide, a healthy individual who's leading this play will abide by those rules. And the sub can use a safe word, and so can the Dom. The sub can use a safe word anytime they want when they're not comfortable. And the rule is, the way I've been trained, is when somebody uses a safe word and says no, you immediately stop and say, thank you for taking care of yourself. The unhealthy Dom is the one who says you have too many rules, you have too many boundaries. Or when you use a safe word, they say you really don't mean it and keep going. That's now assault. Here's the thing. Assault can happen in any sexual relationship, power dynamics or not. It can happen in a committed relationship between husband and wife, whether or not you're playing around in kink. So that's where that comes into play. When it comes to the concern with a client about my ability to get somebody to do something they don't want to do, any therapist, licensed or not, any coach can do that, licensed or not, and manipulate their clients. If I ask you, Graham, you're having an issue with, there's something that went on in your youth, and I'm going to say to you, I'm going to want you to put your father, deceased or not, put your deceased father in that couch over there, and I want you to ask him the following questions. You can look at me and say, and I'll explain to you, this is what I want you to do, and I want you to ask your father these questions. You can ask me, well, how's that going to help? And we'll talk about that, and I'll let you know how it's going to help. I'm not going to say, do it because I said so. And you can look at me and say, I don't feel comfortable doing that. Okay, why not? And we're going to figure out, why don't you feel comfortable doing that? I'm not going to make you do a piece of work without your consent and knowing what your boundaries are. And that, frankly, is the first lesson when I do a conscious kink training with a group. That is the first lesson we get to, is what exactly is consent? Consent is yes. Somebody who says maybe, that's a no. I'm not sure, that's a no. Let me think about it, that's a no. You want to hear yes, and you really would like to hear somebody say, F yes, that's really what I want to experience. Great. Anything other than a yes is a no. Same thing in the coaching room. You don't want to do something, we don't do it. Let's talk about why from a place of curiosity, not from a place of pushing.
Right.
Does
So
that help alleviate your concern? I want to make sure I answered that part of your question.
well, again, there's just so many, it's like an onion. There's so many layers here, Matthew. But, with the therapy portion, I would say that in certain cases, you don't want to obviously push people, but why do people have these unresolved issues is because they've never confronted them. So you somehow
Right.
have to get them to a point where they are going to they are going to talk to their deceased living father on the couch. They have to
In
get
a
to that.
healthy way.
Hmm.
Let's say that. I will confront you in a healthy way. It is not to say, Graham, I'm going to make you do this thing, which may be harmful to you in the long run. Perpetuating harm is something I always avoid. And I lecture to psychologists when I do a kink aware training, when I train people in conscious kink, it is do no harm. It is all about not perpetuating harm. So a good example of that is, and this is not something I enjoy doing, and this is something I actually don't like doing, and I don't often do it at all. There is a numerous different places to play in the kink world. One of them is some people like degradation play. They want to be called worthless. Here's why, and all your listeners right now is, why would anybody want to have that? Imagine you are a high-powered
There could be
CEO.
one out. There could be one out there who's like,
Who's
oh,
like,
yeah.
I totally get it. But a lot of listeners, imagine that you are high-powered CEO, you are a well-regarded individual, male, female, doesn't matter, but you are on all the time. People need something from you all the time. You have a lot of people relying on you. You have a lot of expectations on you. It is a whole bunch of pressure. It's a whole bunch of power. It's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on all the time that you have to be paying attention to. Sometimes you just want an hour to relax. And sometimes for some of these people, being told you're useless and completely and totally worthless. And now they're like, oh my God, I would love for an hour to be useless and not have to be on all the time. And it's cathartic and it's relaxing for them. But here's the thing, do no harm. If somebody wants to be degraded verbally, for example, but they don't want aftercare, they don't want to come out of it, they just want to be left feeling like stuff, that's not somebody I'm going to work with. Because they just want to perpetuate a harm. They just want to feel bad and continue to feel bad. I don't want to work with somebody like that. I'm not going to perpetuate their harm. I can say no to somebody's wishes too.
But if the enjoyment comes out of the kink of that, do you want to alleviate the person from that? Because that's where they're getting the enjoyment from.
I have my limits on what I believe is psychologically healthy for someone. And so my understanding, my belief, my experience, and my training is I'm not going to leave somebody. You may have to bleep this, I apologize. But if your goal is to feel like shit and continue to feel like shit, and as just having this voice in your head that says, I am a miserable, worthless human being, and you want to spend the next week or two or month feeling that way, that's not a healthy place to be. If you want to spend a little bit of time going, oh my God, I love being told that I have no value just for an hour, just so I can relax. And then you have the aftercare to say, okay, you do have value, but you don't have to take on everybody else's stuff all the time. It allows them to relax their brain enough to take in the messages to say, I do have value, but I don't need to take on everybody else's stuff and priorities and pressures all the time. That is a cathartic, healthy transition of getting into play to getting your brain and the cortisol levels to drop and getting you to relax so you can come out of it and have a better experience moving forward, not just being told you're shit to feel like shit for the next month. One thing I wanted to add on that comes up frequently is there's a curiosity, or there's a stereotype out there that people who are interested in kink and BDSM are coming from a traumatic standpoint, that something happened in their life and they are reliving it, or it's a triggered response to something that happened. And there are numerous psychological studies and sociological studies that have proven that wrong. It is a curiosity. It is fun. There's lots of reasons that people participate in these activities in an incredibly healthy way. There's a lot of studies, and I'm blanking on the name. I apologize. I can get it to you later. I can email it to you. That I think was 1,100 actually Canadians on what percentage of people are participating in these activities. And these studies have been done all across the world, and it's about 45% of couples have participated in some semblance of these traditional BDSM kink activities. And many of these relationships are healthier than not. People communicate better. They're more vulnerable with each other. They are open and honest about what their needs are. They're actually healthier relationships, psychologically studied, for people who participate in this.
Well, and this brings up something that just occurred to me is this reverse, because I was talking about this sort of, lack of a better term, conflict of interest, where your Dom life may affect your coaching therapeutic life. But what about the opposite? You're in a situation where you're being asked to be a Dom and your coaching side kicks in. So it's kind of like, wapa, tell me about your relationship with your mother. And they're like, F off, hit me again.
So to start with, that is boundaries and negotiation. And here's the thing. And you're saying, well, there's a flogger or a paddle or just a hand, whatever. I can stop a situation at any time. It's actually surprising how many people don't realize it when I say in a training that, there are safe words and you want safe words, whatever you want that to be. And there's a whole bunch of different ideas on that. But you need a safe word. So the sub can say, I'm overwhelmed. I need to slow down or stop right now. Doms can use safe words too. And it's amazing how many people sitting in the room go, wait a minute, what? Like, yeah, if you're not comfortable in a situation, you can stop as well and say, this isn't working for me. We need to slow down. We need to stop. So if somebody's in a position where me with my training says, this is turning unhealthy, I'm more than happy to stop. If I'm in a piece of work, if I'm in a play part, a scene with somebody playing and it's enjoyable, whatever, and something comes up for them, I can put it in the back of my mind and say, for the debrief that happens later on, I can say to them, this thing came up. What was going on? Or is this something you want to talk about? Or is this something, did you even realize this happened? Let's talk to maybe on a slightly different subject. Let's talk through the parallels between these two worlds. First thing I'm going to ask you when you come into the room to do some coaching is, what do you want to change about yourself? I teach people when they want to have some conscious kink play. First thing you ask is, what do you want to experience? So you get that same similar answer. The next step is, what do you want to experience? What does that look like? What is it that you want to change? Where are the boundaries? What do you want to experience? It's the same for both. So in the coaching room, I'm going to say, this is what you want to change. Why? What's going on? How does that work for you? And where are what are some of the boundaries? You do not want to bring your dead father into the room. You don't want to talk about these things. Okay, that's a limit that I will abide by. Same thing in the kink world. What is it that you want to experience? Boundaries and negotiations. You do a piece of work, and it's about a 20-minute piece of work with somebody when I do redecision work of what is it you want to change, and let's go about and let's do the piece of redecision work versus a play in a BDSM scene. After the BDSM scene, there's aftercare. After a piece of work in the coaching room, there is support and there is honor for what you have done and some work to start the integration. Hey, great, you're no longer thinking this way. Now you realize what's going on. So you have that experience. That's the aftercare. A couple of days after BDSM scene, you have a debrief. What went well? What didn't go well? What do you want to do better next time? This next time I meet with a client after a big piece of work and a lot of change, we're going to continue that integration and support to help them keep that change and recognize, same example, it's not your fault. the parallels between the two worlds for making change is pretty extensive. But in this case, I don't combine the two. It's two different worlds. I keep the knowledge that crosses back and forth, not any physicality.
But do you, and I do mean this in all seriousness, do you find yourself in situations where being a Dom and something triggers in you the side, your, coaching side, where you're like, this person needs help? And obviously, no, I'm serious. Like in the moment, you may not do it, but as you talk about, you have this sort of post-game talk down. I can't remember what you called it.
It happened, aftercare and debrief.
Aftercare, yeah. Do you then kind of switch into the
not
other?
During aftercare.
Well, not during aftercare. So you keep those separate.
Too much vulnerability right there. However, I talked to my trainer, my therapist about this years ago. Are you ever, and it's not even the Dom work, it's not even the BDSM work that I am. I don't consider myself as part of I don't consider who I am just a Dom. I am a person who's gotten some significant training in power dynamics, leadership and followership, Dom and sub, and that training has come from my training as a professional Dom. But whether or not I step into somebody and say, you're doing something that's worrisome, I'm going to do that just because I'm a friend. In this case, I'm a friend with some background enough to go, you know what? I'm not sure anybody else notices this, but I do. And I'll never bring it up again. But if you've got a counselor or somebody you're talking to, this is something that came up and I saw. That's just me, frankly, being human, I think.
I just want to talk back about something you mentioned where you said you're a switch. So you're both a sub and a Dom.
That's an interesting thing.
Do you feel that being in that subordinate role gives you a better understanding to be a Dom?
Absolutely. 100%. So I will give, here's my G-rated analogy. I used to do ballroom dance. I used to compete a little bit in ballroom dance. And I was a lead, certainly. One thing that made me a tremendously better leader on the dance floor is if there was a figure that I was having trouble with, my dance instructors would lead me through it. I would follow through. When I first learned Argentine tango, I learned to follow long before I learned to lead. So I know what the follow wants to feel from the lead as I'm, having them dance backwards wearing heels around a dance floor. So yes, being a sub certainly helps you know from a Dom's perspective how better to take care of your sub. By the way, if you're a sub and you get a feel for what it's like to be a Dom, to use your power, it'll make you a better sub. Here's the thing, let's talk about it from a business perspective. If you're a leader who's never had the opportunity to follow or do the job, you're going to be a terrible leader than somebody who's come up through the ranks. What's interesting is a lot of people that I went through my training with will tell you that they came in as a sub or they came in as a Dom. But the more you do your work on yourself and clean up all of those issues and all of the boundary issues or whatever it is going on in your head, the more switchy you become. The more you find yourself in a balance between leadership and followership, the more you find yourself in a balance between your masculine energies and your feminine energies. And that's not a gender comment. That's not a sex comment. We all have both of those energies.
So that would sound somewhat that we need to open ourselves up to vulnerability. And is by opening ourselves up to vulnerability making us stronger?
That is the most powerful thing we can do, is to be vulnerable, to say, this is what's going on. So much miscommunication working with couples, so much miscommunication in couples is somebody trying to protect themselves from some feeling which is hurtful to them. They are desperately trying not to show any vulnerability, and it creates chaos in the relationship. it creates chaos in their own lives. No, you're not going to go to some stranger on the street and be incredibly vulnerable about what's going on in your life. But with your partners and your loved ones, yes, you need to be vulnerable to say, this is what's going on. This is why I'm fearful. So yes, 100%, there's the crux of so many of our own issues, is we need to be vulnerable and face the stuff that scares us.
But to me, it's somewhat counterintuitive because I think being vulnerable to the people that we
Weakness.
are yeah, it's showing weakness. It's harder to show that you're vulnerable to somebody you love than perhaps a stranger because there's no cost involved if it's a stranger. You
Right.
can walk away. But as soon as you open yourself up to someone who, your partner, a good friend, all of a sudden you're kind of like really exposing yourself. And that is, I think, the hardest thing to do.
And it absolutely is. And it's one of those things, especially, and I'll say it, especially for men in the United States, in Canada, North America, especially for men that, in many other countries too, we are not supposed to be vulnerable. We are not supposed to show emotion. And so we're taught that from an early age. And so, yes, if you've not done it, I'm not going to be vulnerable. That's just showing weakness. Vulnerable with the wrong people is dangerous because now they have things that they can push against you. And to your comment that sometimes it's easier to be vulnerable with a stranger than the ones we love, you know the expression, we can only be hurt by the ones we love? Well, yeah, of course, because we don't let strangers in past our boundaries, so of course they can't hurt us. But the ones we love that we're closest to, you need to be vulnerable to be able to say what's going on and who I am authentically. And it's a very powerful place to be. And oh, yeah, I know it sounds counterintuitive. I was terrified of doing it for years too.
Well, and now that we've unraveled this knot, I actually want to sort of try and tie it up now into a nice bow because
Perfect.
I think many of the things you're talking about, and we talk about vulnerability, we talk about, expressing our true selves. And I think, and I want to actually hear your opinion on this, but nowadays, because of such things as being able to talk openly about kinks, about our sexuality, because that is obviously a very personal, very vulnerable thing to talk about, that in society in general, we see some regression these days in some sort of, the toxic masculinity and stuff like that. But because we can now talk more openly about these sort of, proclivities, we are willing to be more open about our feelings. Now, I don't know if you remember, I grew up in a time in one of our, back when we had free local newspapers, there used to be an article
Right.
in the back of a newspaper published here called the Georgia Straight, and it was Dan Savage with Savage Love.
Oh, yeah,
Are you
Dan
familiar?
Savage.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think he really opened up to many people in this world this idea that there is this whole subculture of sexuality and stuff like that that we can talk about and express. And because it's then sort of brought into the general consciousness, the zeitgeist, we are now able to talk more about this. Are you seeing a change from your perspective, both as a coach and as a Dom, where people are being more open about this kind of thing?
Dan Savage opened it up. He's able to talk about these things a lot more. I think with TikTok and Instagram and some of the people you can follow there, sex lecturers, kink therapists, and all of that stuff online, we're more able to hear about it, read about it, see it in the privacy of our own homes. Is anybody walking around on the street with a flogger over their shoulder looking for partners? Most probably not. Are you able to better find communities that support what you want to do? Absolutely. That may be a little bit easier now, but there's still in society a lot of shame wrapped around it. Now, what is shame? Best definition I've ever heard is something that you're afraid to ask about. That is shame. And whether it's kink or BDSM for some people who may participate in that freely, openly all the time, or it's some other sexual desire that they find some shame around that they're afraid to ask about. In society, I think it's getting harder to talk about just with what's politically going on in the world right now. in our own little communities, I think it's easier for us to find the communities that support us in what we want to be sexually. LGBTQ, kink, whatever that is. I think we're privately able to find better communities, but socially, I still think there's a significant stigma around everything. And I think right now it's getting a little bit worse.
Yeah. Well, I definitely on Humdrumedy, we avoid talking politics. So I want to stop there about that.
Steer
But
away from that.
steer
But
away
yeah,
from that. But one thing
understandable.
I wanted to, I like this quote that you said, but I'm going to slightly change it, which is about shame. And I don't think shame is something you're afraid to ask about. I think shame is something you're afraid to admit. So you could ask about BDSM, but if you're going to admit that that's something I really want to, I'm asking because, I'm not just curious, I'm more than just curious, right? That's where the shame comes in. That people don't want to admit that this perhaps is actually, maybe even to their partner, that,
Yeah.
hey, hon, let's try this out.
I think they're rolled in together. I think that are there some people who are going to ask a question about something that they're really not interested in? Maybe. But I think a lot of the times, certainly when it comes to this kind of thing, that a lot of people are just afraid to ask because they don't want to be outed. They don't want to admit. So I think both of our quotes are accurate. I think they're kind of one and the same, kind of
Mm,
rolled in together. And that's a lot of things, but it doesn't even have to be, kink BDSM. It could be um there were people who would find a French kiss incredibly kinky and very, very shameful, or other types of sexual activities that would be oral sex, which is more normative, that a lot of people would feel a tremendous amount of shame about, let alone various other things that are not in the DSM that people would be ashamed to talk about or ask about, and they don't know where to turn. I think in some ways, again, it's easier to find information online now than it was 20 years ago. And I think that helps people kind of explore and experience. And BDSM kink, by the way, can be any number of facets of different things. It can simply be, um, it doesn't have to be paddles. It doesn't have to be floggers, leather. It doesn't have to be handcuffs. It doesn't have to be latex or whatever other fetish that you want to talk about. It can simply be turn all the lights off. And I mean pitch black in the room, or have somebody wear a blindfold. A blindfold and a makeup brush can be considered kinky. A makeup brush is just to brush against the skin. Nothing all that sensual, very sexual. It's just very, very sensual. Some people find that with a blindfold and just a little bit of touching, that to some people would be kink.
mm. Yeah, you don't have to go 0 to 60 to explore
No,
this realm. Yeah.
I don't recommend going from 0 to 60. You do not want to do, you don't want to grab the cement block and jump in the pool in this realm. It's a very dangerous way to get started. And that, again, some things I will talk about with my group trainings. It's a lot of what I talk about sometimes with therapists who are just becoming kink aware is how to help your clientele expand upon their sexuality and do it in a way that is safe and healthy.
Now, Matthew, as we draw to the end of our conversation here, I think I would be remiss, and people may be wanting to know, you're a professional coach, you are a professional Dom. Which pays you more money?
um, it is a mix. It's pretty well balanced right now. The client work is super satisfying, and I like working with clients and helping people make change, and seeing that growth is so special and so amazing. The trainings that I do are less frequent, and both do well for me. The trainings, be it a multi-hour group training or working with psychologists and helping them to become kink knowledgeable. Um, they both work pretty well in combination.
And a follow-up question is, how do you claim that on your taxes? And has anyone ever asked for a receipt?
I am not a sex worker. Nothing I do is illegal. It is all on my taxes as the Stir Institute. And that is what I do is I am a coach and I work with people and I teach groups.
But what about the Dom side of things? Like, is that included
I
under the Stir Institute?
That is the Stir Institute. And again, like I said, not a sex worker, so nothing is illegal. I don't do anything like that. That's where the training comes into play. In my personal life, I'm not getting paid for it.
Ah, okay, okay, I see. That's where I was getting at. Okay.
There you go. Okay, no, in my personal life, I'm not getting paid.
All right.
Not in money. It's
Not
satisfying.
in satisfaction. Now,
So just to let you know, um, when I first came across that training, that erotic leadership training, I took it out of just curiosity. This is a part of my life I've never opened up to other people about and said, okay, I'm curious about this. When I was invited to take the training course, the 7-month training class, I took that on a whim. I took it as curiosity. I took it as part of my personal life to say, I want to get better doing this. This is a fun activity. I enjoy it. I enjoy the people I'm with when I do it. And I want to be better for my partners, for my lovers. So why don't I take this training? It was only when I was 3-4 months into the 7-month class when I realized there is such an incredible psychological component to this that I decided to, as we described before, step in the middle between that Venn diagram of a sexuality therapist and a TA counselor. I took this personally to make myself a better partner. I didn't realize at the time that it was going to make me a better coach with all of this training. From a G perspective, a G-rated perspective, I have a training in power dynamics. I help people figure out the patterns in their lives that don't work and help them build from their relationships to power. That's really what I do. It just so happens that my power dynamics training comes from the conscious kink community and knowing from a Dom and a sub how power relates to everything that we do, whether it's in the bedroom or the boardroom.
all right. Well, Matthew, I could talk to you for a long time. You're very insightful, very interesting. And I just want to thank you that during our time together, you didn't dominate the conversation and you let it free flow between us.
Did I help you untie the knot?
You helped me untie the knot and we were able to tie it back up into a nice bow.
I appreciate that. I really do appreciate your curiosity and your openness. And I'll even say it, the vulnerability you had in saying, let's talk about this and see how this works and see how this fits, and trying to depathologize some of this, make it a lot less scary, hopefully for your listeners as well, and as for you. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate your own curiosity and your willingness to have me on here and to have this conversation. So I thank you just as much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I appreciate you in turn. And I hope people, after listening to this episode, do, look up the Stir Institute or just go and find more information if that's something they're interested in, and not to find shame in that exploration.
Absolutely. That's the best thing we can do is open up, be vulnerable, and what it really comes down to, live the life you want, not what you're supposed to.
So there you go. Desire, consent, and understanding are all aspects you can incorporate into improving both your personal and professional life. I hope this episode has opened your eyes to expanding your boundaries that can help you out of the daily humdrummity. To find out more about Matthew and his coaching programs, visit the Stir Institute website at stirinstitute.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and please leave a comment on this or any other episode. Until next time, get cracking and take care.